My name is Phil Perazio, and I'm a urologic oncologist, a surgeon. Like many of you, I absolutely love what I do, and I would not choose another profession. But I have struggled with professional identity, practice efficiency, and wellness over the years. Operate with Zen is a podcast designed to explore a mindful approach to surgery and to being a surgeon. By discussing these struggles and mindful solutions, I hope together we can create a community of strong and healthy surgeons. Enjoy. All right, and welcome to Operate with Zen. I have the great pleasure of being joined today by Shah. Jay, introduce yourself to the crowd.
Yeah. Hey, Phil, thanks. Thanks for having me. As you said, my name is Shah. I am a urologist, and I am a urologist who subspecializes clinically on patients with urologic cancers. And I focus pretty narrowly now on patients with bladder cancer. I operate on them when they need surgery, and I manage them medically when they don't need surgery. In addition to being a urologist, I've also been trying to grow into some leadership roles. So I serve right now at Stanford University, where I am on faculty, as the Vice Chief of Staff of the hospital, and I'll be the next Chief of Staff when the current Chief of Staff's term is over. I've also really gotten into quality improvement in the last decade, half a decade. So I serve as what we call our physician improvement leader for the department, which means I oversee the QI infrastructure and execution of QI projects for our department every year. And I also have the pleasure of serving as the co-director of the Stanford Leadership Development Program, which means that I oversee the development of the future leaders of Stanford. And to me, it's mainly an opportunity to keep developing myself as well, because I think I've learned this is a lifelong thing. You don't do a 6-week course and be done. And I'm really excited to be here, Phil. I heard your podcast, I guess a couple months ago. And with COVID, we haven't actually had a chance to see each other. And we had a conversation, you and I did, about a month and a half back. And it was so fascinating to me to see that you had been on a similar journey that I have been on in terms of trying to figure out, now that I'm at my midpoint in my career, what are the things that I'm trying to do? What's really important? And seeing you having been working on your own development, your journey, your coaching, and focus on wellness really spoke to me. And I was excited to come and talk to you about it here.
Well, thanks, Jay. I'm equally excited. And just to give a little personal context too, I was a medical student at Columbia, and Jay was one of the outstanding residents. And one of the reasons I am where I am today was following kind of Jay's example and always seeing him, a little bit ahead of me and being kind of a bright, shining star to shoot for. So Jay, you've always been an inspiration. So I'm really glad to be chatting with you today.
Thanks, bud. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So take us a little bit through your journey. You've been at some of the greatest academic centers in the country. You've definitely evolved personally, but I'm sure you've seen some of those institutions evolve. And with wellness as a backdrop, just give us a little bit of the personal story and how you've kind of seen that evolve at those places.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So as you just alluded, I was a resident at Columbia when we first met. I was actually also Columbia for medical school, and then I stayed there for residency. And the context of wellness will not take very long to discuss during my residency. And I've always, my whole life, have been someone that enjoys physical activities, working out, etc. But I have to be honest, during residency, for most of it, working out was a quick run across the GW Bridge, maybe every month or two. I played rugby for Columbia Medical School, and that was probably a horrible mistake because I'm all of $150 right now, and as I understand it, the goal of games like rugby is to just smear guys like me into the ground. That's what the big guys try to do. But after residency, or towards the end of residency, I had 2 young kids. We had 2 kids 2 years apart, or 14 months apart, and I started thinking about, hey, you know what? I got to start taking care of my body. It's not that I had gained all that much weight or I had any major medical diagnoses or anything, But as you know, having children sort of changes your frame of reference for everything. And one of the things I realized is I want to make an active effort to take care of myself, because I want to see these little people turn into big people. And then I want to play with their kids. And I didn't want to wait till I was very sick or very old to start getting in shape. And I started even in residency when we'd have 6:15 rounds or 6:30 a.m. rounds. I would go to the Columbia gym, which opened at 6, and just go run 2 miles as fast as I could, and then go straight to the hospital across the street. And then I did a fellowship. And I hope no one in the academic world is really listening to this, but one of the things I was most excited about was my fellowship, because I went to MD Anderson, where I did a 3-year fellowship. And I had the choice of picking the 2-year track or the 3-year track. And I purposely picked the 3-year track, what's considered to be the longer, more painful route, because I saw it differently. I, at that point, had a 2-year-old and a 10-month-old, and doing 2 years in the lab and then 1 year clinical, as opposed to 1 year in the lab and 1 year clinical, gave me the opportunity to be around for the kids for an extra year. Because during residency, I knew that I was gone before the kids woke up. And most often I got home after they were in bed already. But as a research fellow, I knew that I could get the kids ready in the morning, drop them off at daycare, pack their bags with formula, et cetera, and then later on with food, and go to the pool, swim 2 miles, then show up to the lab and still be the first person in the lab, because I'd show up, in my mind, very late at 8:30, and there wouldn't be another body in the lab till 10:30, 11, 12. And I knew that I could reliably pick up the kids every day. And for me, that was one of the lasting things that I really took away from that time in the lab. I appreciated being able to learn the basic science techniques and being able to understand what our basic science colleagues do. But I most personally was fortunate for what I consider the internship of parenting, from birth till potty training, that I was able to be the primary parent. And now that my kids are teenagers, I think a big part of my personal wellness is the deep connection I have with these kids. And I think it's from a lot of experiences like those early times in the lab. And then during the clinical year, by then I had really gotten into triathlons and marathons. So it was easy to keep going with the physical activity. And ever since, as you know, every time there's an academic conference, people pick which hotel they're going to stay at based on how close it is to the convention center or how nice the rooms are. I literally will look up the gyms and see, okay, what's in that gym? Or how close is it to that trail nearby? Or what can I do physically? Because I think if you think of yourself as, I'm a very busy surgeon, I have all these important things I do, I just don't have time to work out, and I have to go to this conference, I'm going to catch up with all my friends and really party hard and burn the candle at both ends. I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's hard to get that focus on wellness. For me, I just feel like you have to make a decision that this is important to me and I'm going to find ways to make it happen. So in terms of the things I do now, it's the same thing. If I have a case that cancels, I'm going to find a way to grab those gym clothes out of the car and go run off the frustration I feel for having lost that OR block or wasted that time, as opposed to going and yelling at people saying, what are you doing? How'd that case get canceled, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's great, Jay. I mean, there's a number of really important, I think, lessons for people to take from that. One of them is, we talk on the podcast a bunch about micro and macro breaks and giving yourself a chance to recover, recoup, gain insight into your life. And I think the time you spent with your kids, those first 2 years in the lab, is a phenomenal example of giving yourself time, giving yourself space to gain a little bit perspective on your life and what's important to you, both in and outside of medicine. So I think really important lesson there.
Yeah, and I think we don't focus on that enough. We are, especially at the earlier points of our career, we're so focused on making it and getting our name out there and getting that high impact paper. And those things are all important. They really are. But to me, they are that much sweeter if they're balanced with the focus on our sort of values outside of the hospital too.
Yeah, and I love the other part of it too. And I always knew when I was in a good hotel, because I'd find you at the gym at 6 or 6:30 in the morning before the conference started, and I could never compete with you, but we'd both be in the same place at the same time. So I had that going for me. But I love how you talk about the identity. If you want to be a healthy person, you need to act like a healthy person. You need to go to the gym. It's not because you have diabetes or because you're overweight, although those are great motivating factors to get somebody to be healthy. But if you want to be a healthy person and take care of yourself, you have to act like a healthy person and take care of yourself. So make the time to go to the gym, make the time to go on runs, to do yoga, whatever it may be in your life. Identify those things that are physically or emotionally important for your wellness and live that life. I think that's great.
Yeah. And I think, to that point, I think a lot of us don't think it's valuable enough to do that, or we feel selfish. Feel like, oh, this is just me being selfish. And I've heard people talk so eloquently about the difference between selfish and self-care. And I think we do have to be careful, because there is probably a gray zone in there where you can do things that are selfish under the label of self-care. But I think for many people, it's the opposite, where they feel like, no, I don't want to, I'm not going to go to the gym because that's just for me. I'm going to go to this, I'm going to go to that instead. And you're right. And as you just said, you associate my identity, Phil, associate Jane's identity with, he's probably going to be at the gym. And if you go to the gym and I'm staying at that hotel and you don't see me, you think, hey, I wonder if Jay's at this conference. I haven't seen him, And then I start feeling guilty, like, oh man, everyone's gonna know if I'm slacking off. Like, I've made this bed. I better go lay in it.
Yeah, no, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it helps kind of feed itself. And if you don't mind, since we're on this train, give the audience a little bit of an understanding on how you got to triathlons and competitive functions, because it's not overnight you wake up and say, I'm going to do a marathon. There's baby steps here, and just kind of talk to the audience on how you got there.
Yeah, well, sure thing. I grew up for the later part of my childhood near the beach. I grew up in southern New Jersey, on a little barrier island called Brigantine. And I was a lifeguard during the summers. And I rowed crew in high school and in college. And I just always have enjoyed being in the water. So after that long stretch of medical school and residency, though I was in New York City, I wasn't really in the water or near the water, if I'm being honest. So when I got to fellowship, was in Houston, had two little kids who I would drop off at daycare, said, I want to start getting back into the water. And my co-fellow, Rob Svatek, one day, he had the desk right behind me, turned and said, hey man, we should do a triathlon. Rob gets full credit for this, planting the seed in my head. And I said, yeah, that's a great idea. And he said it to me, and he said to one of our other co-fellows, John Papadopoulos. So we all said, yeah, we should totally do it. And Rob said it, and then didn't do anything about it for a while. I took it, said, we should do it. And I signed up for a triathlon. And John said, oh, that's a great idea. And he went and bought a $1,000 bike. So we all sort of had our own images of what we were doing with this. And from the time Rob first made that statement to the time I was standing at the starting line of my first triathlon was maybe a month and a half. And I got to tell you, Phil, I am so glad that there are no pictures of that day, because I just signed up for this thing. I worked out a little bit. It wasn't a long triathlon. It was just what's called a sprint distance triathlon. But I showed up in my Bobo swim trunks. I didn't have a helmet for my bike, and I just had my little sort of clunky commuter road bike. And I showed up, and I see everybody else. I mean, these are like, Statue of David looking people with Speedos and, fancy teardrop looking helmets. And they all have clubs, and they're high-fiving each other, and they're talking about their nutrition plans. And I was just thinking, oh, we need a helmet. I literally borrowed a helmet from the bike shop. That there was like a tent where they tune up people's bikes, and said, hey, they said I can't compete because I don't have a helmet. Can I buy one? I was like, here, you've clearly never done a try. He looked me over once, said, here, man, just borrow this. We'll clean it afterwards. But just that first event sort of got me thinking, this is great. I want to do this. And then subsequently, Rob and John Papadopoulos, and actually someone well, Deb Sundy, he was a medical student at the time doing a year of research with us at MD Anderson. And the four of us got into it. We kind of we had a little community where we would sign up for races together and we'd talk about, hey, what's your workout today? What's your workout today? And you're right. You don't wake up and just say, I'm going to do a marathon tomorrow, but you do it. You might say, hey, I want to go sign up for a sprint triathlon. And then you think, well, I really stunk on that. I think I could do better. And you get excited and you go to Olympic and then half Ironman distances. And then in the off season, you're itching to keep the connection to it. You think, well, the water's too cold right now, but I can go train for the Austin Marathon. You can start doing marathons, and it's like any other big undertaking. You start small. You don't wake up and say, hey, I'm going to submit an R1 tomorrow, or say, hey, I'm going to go do an RPLMD tomorrow. You do smaller things, and then you continue to progress. And honestly, as surgeons and in urology, that's what we do well. We perseverate well. We take something little and just keep at it and keep at it. Our super egos allow us to keep doing that. Just a matter of what we apply that super ego toward.
Yeah. And, there's this whole concept of kind of flow and flow enjoyment. I don't know if you've read any of the books or literature on that, but one of the main tenets of that is you have to keep moving the bar. Things are only enjoyable when they're challenging. And it doesn't have to be a big challenge, but even just micro steps and keeping things challenging, doing, as you said, running this race a little bit better, doing that operation a little bit faster, getting your patient out of the hospital a little bit sooner, keeping the bar moving a little bit, making it a little bit more challenging, helps us get enjoyment and interest out of what we do and helps generate wellness, whether it's in the OR, with patient care, or out of the OR.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with that anymore. You said it perfectly.
So it's a perfect segue as we talk about kind of wellness and transitions into kind of now what you do. And just to make the audience clear, many of the surgeons out there listening and medical providers are aware of the ERAS pathway. And Jay was one of the pioneers, if not the pioneer, of kind of the ERAS pathway for cystectomy and bladder cancer care. And now you've transitioned into kind of more of a leadership and professional development role. Not that you've abandoned those other things, but tell us about that transition and how it goes from research and academics now into leadership and what your thought process has been there.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for that very kind attribution. I don't know that I would say I am the father of that. I think there were a lot of people some people who were talking about it and doing it for a while. I just joined the course and said, hey, this makes sense. We should do this. But to your question, yeah, I think it's hard to go straight from training to being a leader. And I think that's not realistic. I remember hearing people say when they were residents or fellows, I want to be a chair someday. And I think that's a nice sentiment, but I think it's important to focus more on how do I want to impact my field? How do I want to contribute? I think, I'm sure you've heard it said before, the best leaders are the ones who know how to follow really well. You can't be a good leader if you don't know how to be a good follower. So for me, early on, I literally was just trying to think about, okay, I'm technically trained to do this very complex operation, removing bladders on very old, very sick people. And the outcomes aren't that great. What can I do? Where do I have agency to try to make this better? So I was just focused on trying to make the operation better, trying to make the management of the patients before and after the operation better. And I met some great people along the way who taught me how they do things. I sort of took a little bit from this person, that person, and just tried to apply it to my patients. And one of the things that I learned along the way was that things like implementing ERAS pathways aren't just flipping a switch. You don't just say, okay, we're doing it. It requires you to collaborate with lots of different people. You have to get the anesthesiologists on board. You have to get the geriatricians to see the patients beforehand. You have to get the therapists. You have to get your own nursing teams and advanced practice provider teams on board. And I realized that as we were getting better at managing these patients and publishing on it and sort of trying to get other people to do it, one of the things I was really getting enjoyment out of was that team aspect. I was enjoying being part of a team and trying to figure out, okay, how can we be most effective together? Not what am I individually the best at, but how could I get each of these people to do their part maximally well so that we can, the final product, how can we grow this pie so that everyone was shining? Not how do I shine the light on me? In fact, it was the opposite. It's the more you learn to shine the light on other people, the better the product that comes out of that team is. And I think naturally what that led to is, okay, how do I focus on roles where I get to build great teams?
I think that's great. I think that's really insightful. And one of the similarities I'd say in our transitions is, my one of my missions has always been to improve the management of urologic cancers. And I tend to focus on kidney and testicular cancers. And the text of my mission statement has not changed at all. Even though earlier in my career, I was more focused on projects and translational research and protocols and improving patient care and patient outcomes. And while I still have interest in those and I'm working on them, I'm still trying to improve the management of the disease. But now I'm more focused on the people and the teams and how we can, as a team, improve the management of cancer. How do we put the right people with the right specimens and ask the right questions to further the disease than necessarily do the project myself? And I think it's a really interesting parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think about what we do as surgeons, the first question we ask ourselves is, can I do this operation? And we focus on learning it. That's what we do during residency and fellowship and early junior faculty time if you're in academics. Can I just physically, technically do the operation? And then for folks like you and me who are in academics, the next question is, can I teach someone to do this operation? I know I can put a clip on that hilum. I know I can take that pedicle, but can I teach someone? That's the true test of, am I doing this right? There's the multiplier effect of teaching people how to do something versus doing it yourself is clear. You know, if you think about, we both have been in practice around 10 years or so, and you multiply the number of residents or fellows that are now doing an operation that you taught them all around the country, perhaps in other countries around the world as well. That is so much greater in terms of the number of patients impacted than the number of kidneys or testicular cancers that you've removed or bladder cancers that I have removed. And I think it's the same thing when you transition into the team building and the leadership part. It's not just about, well, how much can I do? It's how much can I teach others to do? And I think the measure of your impact on a place is not what happens when you're there. It's what keeps happening after you're gone.
It's really beautiful, Jay. And I think it's just appropriate then to comment briefly on one of your great mentors and an inspiration to me who we recently lost in Chris Wood. Yeah. And I didn't know Chris as well as you did, but we ran in the kidney cancer circles and we had a number of interactions. And one of the things that always struck me about Chris, and we talk a lot about on this podcast, and when I talk to medical students and other residents and young faculty, is defining your purpose and who do you want to be. And we lost Chris way too early, but Chris lived his purpose. And in my mind, that was to make to, first of all, everyone know that he was a great and phenomenal badass surgeon, and Chris certainly was. But the second was every patient and every trainee he ever interacted with knew how much he cared about them. And that was clear from all of the interactions you saw kind of before and after his passing. And he really did live his purpose, and his legacy will live on in that purpose and who he was. And, I'm sure you have thoughts on that too.
Yeah. And I apologize if my voice gets a little crackly here. It was just a couple of weeks ago, basically, maybe a month ago that Chris passed away. And I know for me and for a lot of us that trained with him, that it was a shock. It still is a shock. And yeah, he's to me an amazing individual, because for anyone that knows Chris, you know that he was pretty gruff. He's not the guy that's going to walk up to you, hey buddy, how are you doing? I like that new haircut. That was never him. And he never pretended to be that. He was a surgeon, and he told you what he thought, and he got angry when you screwed up, and he was happy when you didn't screw up in the OR. And I most came to appreciate Chris after my fellowship when I was faculty. And early on when you're first starting, I don't know if everyone does this or not, but one of the things I always did was I always made sure that I had a lot of backup. So my first few kidney cases I was doing, I'd always say, hey, Chris, what day are you operating? Because I want to make sure I do my case on that day, because if something happens, I need to know you're there. And he was always incredible about that. He was always encouraging and saying, you can do it. You got this. Yeah. But he was always available. And he was sort of, I would hear from the circulators, oh yeah, Dr. Wood was in here, and I wouldn't even notice because my head was in the operation, but he would have just checked in. And he made a point of trying to develop all the young faculty members in his department. And when he got invited, as he often did, to go give lectures and talks all over the world, and people would say, hey, you're from world-renowned MD Anderson. Can you bring some other world-renowned surgeons with you? He'd say, sure can. And then he would bring these nobodies that people had not really heard of. He would bring the Jay Shahs and the folks younger than me. And he gave us the opportunity to go practice in Taiwan and the Middle East and in India, just basically just being on stage and learning how to present, learning what identities we wanted to have. And he didn't have to do that. He could have brought the other big names. I actually remember him getting in an argument with our chair, with the chair saying, why don't you take me? I'm the bladder cancer expert. And saying, yeah, that's right. You already are the expert. That's why I'm taking these young guys. We're trying to make them the experts. So like I said, he wasn't warm and fuzzy if you met him, if you didn't know him that well, but he cared deeply about training the next generation. As we were talking about the multiplier effect of teaching others, which is why what you were alluding to about how so much of our field has been impacted by his loss, because he cared for us deeply.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thanks for sharing with us, Jay. I think it's a really important lesson there, not only as a junior surgeon to make sure senior people are around to give you backup. It just gives you a little bit of confidence to know somebody's there. But as you're more senior, to be really available for your junior people, be available for them, show them how much you care and how much you learn and or how much they mean to you and their successes mean to you. And I think you'll build lasting relationships as well.
Yeah, he showed his support not in words, but in actions.
I think, and as we transition kind of into leadership roles and leadership positions, one of the things that was important for me in this new leadership position was that I was kind of fully promoted. And the reason that was important to me was not for the accolade, but the fact that, okay, I've done all of this. I don't have to focus on my productivity now. I don't have to focus on that. I can now focus on the people underneath me that I'm supposed to be building up anyway. And I'd love to hear kind of your transition now into leadership and, kind of what your story was and how you got there at Stanford.
Yeah, sure. I think very similar to what you may have been experiencing. I loved looking around our field and seeing so many of us I don't know of a better way of putting it, just getting over ourselves, just acknowledging our flaws, saying, you know what, I don't need to prove to the world that I'm perfect. I just need to let the world know that I'm okay with who I am and how I am. And what I want to do is make my field, whatever that chosen field is, make my field better for my having been in it. And I think that's what leads us, so many of us, towards these leadership positions, hopefully. I think when you're younger, you think leadership positions are about power. And then at a certain point, hopefully the switch flips and you realize leadership positions are actually about the opportunity to give and to serve, not to be revered and have people waiting on you hand and foot. But to me, a leader is a person in the back of the room watching their mentee presenting something or sort of, getting the spotlight for doing work and thinking, yeah, I contributed to that success. And that's how I see it. That's how I see my opportunities for leadership. But my goal at Stanford, and I don't think I'm anywhere near it yet, we can talk about some challenges, but my goal is that people will see Stanford and Stanford Urology and Stanford Urological Oncology as a place that puts out great leaders. That if someone trained at Stanford, wow, not only are they technically really good, but they're really good about building up a system around them. It doesn't matter where you put them. They seem to interact with people in a way that makes everyone feel comfortable, psychologically safe, and happy and energized to do this important work. And I hope that the way we get there is that people feel that from us while they're training.
Yeah, I think it's, you make a couple of really salient points there. And I think one of the nice ones is that leadership is about giving. It's about service. And you mentioned earlier, yeah, we all went to med school and residency with people who said they wanted to be a chairperson. And in my opinion, some of those people are less likely to be giving and less likely to be leading from the back of the room and tend to be very motivated on their own successes. And like you, I was never one of those people who really thought I wanted a leadership role. And I'll tell you, I still don't want to be a chairperson. I'm very happy in the kind of minor leadership role I have now, but I'm also not naive enough to say I'll never progress from this leadership role, right? I mean, this, 8 years ago, this would not have been exciting to me. It's incredibly exciting to me now. So I don't know what's going to be exciting in 8 years. I'm sure it's going to be something different than what I'm doing now. But I also wanted to get to your point about kind of your leadership concepts there. So tell us, Stanford obviously develops leaders formally and objectively. Give us a little bit of kind of the Stanford model and then your personal spin on cultivating leadership and how you plan on cultivating the leaders around you.
Yeah, I think, so I've only been at Stanford, it's coming up on 5 years in a couple of months, so under 5 years. And I think that I'm not done. I think my best work at Stanford is still very much ahead of me. I think one of the things, I alluded to challenges just a few minutes ago. One of the things that I've stepped back and realized recently is that when I came to Stanford, I came over right when MD Anderson was encouraging me to start on my own leadership journey. So one of the things I negotiated when I got to Stanford was, hey, I would like to still keep trying to develop that part of me. And my chair here was very supportive and fantastic about saying sure and creating a space, time, and opportunity for me to do that development work. And I would say that I've taken full advantage of that in terms of enrolling as a participant in a lot of these courses that Stanford has. And I've really tried to get all the juice out of it and worked on it. And I think in that aspect, it's been successful. But what I've just realized is that in doing that, I have been so focused on developing my own leadership skill set that I came into Stanford in my head, looking at my CV, looking backwards, saying, oh yeah, at Columbia, I got the Resident of the Year Award, and I got the Teacher of the Year Award and the Physician of the Year Award. People like working with me. And I actually think one of my failures here at Stanford so far has been that I haven't spent as much time walking my talk, so to speak, with, for example, with our own residents. I just recently realized that I don't know them that well and they don't know me that well. And we can transition into feedback if you'd like, but I finally figured out how to see the evaluations that residents submit. And it's not easy to get to, but they're all available to me. And I finally saw them and realized, oh, ouch, that's not me. Some of those things aren't nice. And initially I was tempted to explain them away. I was tempted to explain away some of the comments I didn't like or thought, oh, that's not fair, it's not accurate. And I did a lot of reflecting, a lot of soul searching, and said, you don't get to, as in talking to myself, you don't get to decide what other people think of you. So I've sort of taken those comments to heart and realized that, okay, I am not at the place that I want to be with my own residents. And I got to tell you, Phil, it was a little bit heartbreaking. I go around the country giving talks on team building, literally giving talks on team building during residency and leadership and team building. So you talk about having your identity tied up in something and then seeing something that is counter to it. It was very eye-opening. And I've now gone through the various stages of processing that and realized that, okay, I can either let that define me and say, oh, actually turns out that maybe the residents don't like me anymore. Maybe residents are weak these days, or they don't understand, etc. Or I can be defined by how I receive that feedback and how I respond to it. So one of my goals now is to try to figure out how can I be the person that I think I'm capable of being in terms of being there for our own residents in the various ways that I interact with them. Because I've had all these opportunities at the hospital level in terms of having bigger and bigger leadership roles. And yeah, that feels good. It strokes the ego and everything. But if you're not doing the work, or if I'm not doing the work to care for the people, at the core of it, I am a faculty member in a residency program. And the foundation of the cake is that interaction. Everything else, the leadership titles at the hospital, all that is icing. And you can put all the fancy icing, but it's the cake that has to be solid. So I know I'm wandering off from the question you asked, but this is what's been on my mind in terms of wellness and leadership and what is the impact you want to have and all that these days.
No, I love where you're wandering. So tell me, I mean, let's get specific about it. So what's your plan for being a better leader with the residents and walking the walk, as you put it?
Yeah. So I am now making a conscious effort to be more present physically and mentally. So one of the things I do here at Stanford is I have a clinic, a full day clinic at an off-site building. It's about 30 minutes away. And on those days, a lot of times, my first patient's at 8 a.m., I won't come to the hospital and see my post-op day 5, post-op day 6 patient because they're on cruise control. They may go home, they may not go home. Or, you know, for what I do, there's a lot of patients that have relatively long lengths of stay where they may be here for a few weeks. And if it's day 15 or day 17, I think, okay, nothing's really, we're just kind of waiting. And it's been easy for me to rationalize that as nothing's going on, I'm not contributing. But if you think about it from the resident perspective of things, they've been rounding on this patient every day. They don't really have the relationship with the patient outside the hospital. So they have someone who doesn't see them as their doctor saying, why am I not better yet? Why am I not better yet? Whereas with me, I can go in there and say, hey, look, here, I know it's rough. Hang in there, try to keep a positive attitude. And that goes far. And that helps the resident not carry that emotional burden of not being able to answer a patient's question when there isn't a good answer. So I'm trying to be physically more present with the resident. And I'm trying to keep their perspective on things more front of mind for myself. And I'm actually reaching out to the residents a little bit more and trying to create space to let them know that I care about them and that I want them to grow into the great people I think they can be. And, you know, I won't know for a while if it's effective or not. And I want to be mindful to not have it be fake or shallow or just lip service. Like, oh, I'm sending texts. I feel it from inside. Like I want to be more present in the program.
Yeah, I think, you know, you can feel the intention here while we're talking. And I'm sure it will work out in a positive way for you. And I think it's great how you have objectified it, because I think when we objectify things or give things kind of a concrete objective, you know, I don't mean the other connotation of objectify, but when we give kind of a concrete intention, we can then work through it and then also provide ourselves feedback. Are we actually achieving what we meant to do? So being physically present, emotionally protecting residents, building communication and building skills, understanding their perspective. And while these may not be hardcore cancer objectives and outcomes, these are very tangible outcomes that can be measured and evaluated. And you certainly, not only can you kind of evaluate yourself, but you can ask the residents, hey, how am I doing on these things? These are my goals. Am I actually achieving what I set out to do?
Yeah. And you know, I think there's a temptation, especially as we progress further, especially as we have some leadership titles and roles that we can lean on, to say they don't understand. I do important stuff. I'm meeting with the CEO and the CMO and department chairs. You know, I've got bigger problems than these little things. These are just little things. They should be able to handle them. And it's tempting to say, oh, you know, in my day, go down that whole rabbit hole. And I think the true sign of leadership, and I'm hoping, because I'm investing in this fully, is to not do that and to not think that you're above the fray for this stuff. To say, hey, I didn't like hearing that. I want to believe it's not true, but if it's not true, I have to show it, you know?
No, and at our core, I mean, we're here to take care of people. And we may one day transition out of clinical care where we're not the frontline person, but ultimately in this field and in this practice, we're caring for people. I think that's great how you're kind of really sticking with the roots of why you're here and why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, it's hard. I wish it weren't so hard, but it's hard saying, like, just even saying this. On the one hand, I want lots of people to listen to your podcast, and there's a part of me that wants no one to hear this, because I don't want all these people that have heard me present on leadership and team building and residency and have sent me great comments from other programs. Oh, that was so helpful. part of me doesn't want them to hear about this flaw, this way that I've screwed up. But I'm convinced that I think for all of us, medicine is too hard for us to go around pretending like we're doing it perfectly each time. Just like we have M&M every month to talk about what could we have done better clinically for our patients. I think that there's almost a parallel we could draw for a wellness M&M. Just how could I be doing this better for the wellness of myself and these people that I've committed to caring about and I care about deeply.
Yeah, and to get back to your point before, you said leadership is giving, leadership is service, and really before you can give to others and serve others, you need to give and serve yourself. And part of that is recognizing our weaknesses and our failures. And if you can't look inside and acknowledge where you're falling short, you're never going to get any better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was talking to a colleague just a couple of days ago, and he reminded me of a phrase we were talking about how difficult it is right now for everybody with COVID. Just assume everyone's struggling. And, he used the phrase giving grace, and I think that's really apropos these days. We just have to get better at giving grace to others and to ourselves, and just saying, okay, you don't have to be perfect. Just acknowledge that you screwed up, give yourself grace, and then commit to getting better. And same thing for when other people screw up around you. And, I am thankful. On the one hand, I'm sad that I was so focused on the leadership training and developing that skill set that I didn't pay attention to these important relationships with the residents. But then on the other hand, I'm thankful that I have done that training to allow me to feel comfortable for long enough being vulnerable to say, things that I don't like saying about myself.
That's really important. I mean, and I appreciate you being vulnerable. I mean, and I'm not saying it tongue in cheek. I mean, it really is an important part of growth, and I'm glad you're sharing it, because I'm sure there's people in the audience who are going to hear this and recognize that they have vulnerabilities, and by expressing them will make them stronger and better at what they're doing. So the lesson is huge. Tell us more. You talked about your chairperson giving you kind of time and space and effort. Tell us about, nuts and bolts, a little bit of the coursework you've done, some of the formal education at Stanford, but then some of the conceptual framework for success and wellness in leadership at Stanford. They're very well published on it. It's great stuff. So just kind of, sum it up for us if you can.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to be at Stanford in that there is a great relationship between the various schools of the university, and the medical center has made great use of its great relationships with a lot of the business school faculty in terms of helping develop the leadership programs. And I think everyone realizes that if you want to grow as a medical center, you have to have people that are growing as leaders. You have to grow people. So I personally, one of the first courses I did was the Stanford Leadership Development Program, the one I now direct. And things that maybe I was intuitively doing sometimes, maybe intuitively not doing, I think leadership courses make very concrete. So just things like negotiation. How do you negotiate? Things like active listening, running a good meeting. We all go to a million meetings all the time, and if you think about how many of these meetings are truly useful, it's usually a minority of them. But there are things that you can focus on to make the meetings that you run more effective. And there are things that you can do to be a better listener. There are things that you can do to give good feedback to people so it doesn't seem so abrasive, so that people are likely to hear it and are likely to want to improve on it. And if you add all of these concrete skills together, that's what creates the environment for people to feel excited, energized, and appreciated to be part of the team doing important work, because we all do important work. We just have to make sure people feel like they're part of that and they're not just a pawn being used for your own purpose. You start off this podcast talking about purpose and talk about Chris living his purpose. You have to have people feel that purpose and feel like, I am part of this. I'm valuable. I'm integral to this. So I think there's the concrete, the nuts and bolts of learning about leadership. And then there is the internalizing it, to use the gym analogy from what we were talking about, the gym metaphor. Yes, you can say, I'm going to run a 5K, or I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week for the next 4 months. And then there's the internalizing it where you say, I am a healthy person who's going to live an athletic lifestyle. And then it's not just that you check off the boxes of, yes, I went to the gym and moved some metal around, but it's every decision I make stays true to that core. So the same thing with leadership. I don't think you practice leadership in discrete moments. I think it's something that you do every moment of your life. I think it's not something you do on stage when someone's watching or someone asks you an important question. It's how you treat every single person that you come across with, whether it's that department chair with that, in that department you're trying to get a job with, or it's the person who knocks on your door when you're trying to record a podcast to empty your trash, because that's her job. You know, it's literally every single person. Because I think it's all those little moments. You know, they talk about death by 1,000 cuts when they talk about relationships that don't go well, etc. I think it's leadership by 1,000 small little thumbs ups and 1,000 small affirmations.
Yeah, I think that's great, Jay. So tell us, I mean, I'm sure there's people who are interested in cultivating their own leadership. What would your advice be to them? You know, we're each going to have our own pathway, but how would you tell your residents now, or your fellows who are interested in being future leaders, how are you going to help them develop that?
I think one of the things that we can do as mentors for residents, medical students, fellows, junior faculty, is by, just like with our kids, is by modeling it. And I think that more than anything, it is one of the key things we can do, because every resident is very highly motivated. They want to do great things, big things. And if they see good examples of how they could be, and they naturally will want to be like that. You know, you and I can both think back to people that we saw when we were going through our own growth journeys as medical students and residents, of people that were very short-tempered, or would yell, would come in the OR and just throw a complete fit if everything wasn't the way it was supposed to be. And we saw other people who would, to use the phrase we used earlier, give grace and say, hey, I noticed this isn't here. Can you help me understand why? You know, is there a reason that it's not able to, as opposed to just assuming I'm surrounded by idiots or people who want to harm me, because that's almost never the case. No one gets up in the morning and says, today I'm going to see if I can really piss off Dr. Pirazio, or I'm going to go in and see how much of a jerk I can be. No one does that. Everyone comes in, no matter what their role is, you know, with the intention of doing something good. No one thinks I'm a jerk and I'm going to be a jerk. So no one wants to be a jerk. And I think for us, we have to remember that even when residents don't do what we want them to, that they're not trying to do it wrong. It's our job to teach them how to do it better. And for residents who formally want to develop their own leadership skill sets, I think having a mentor or a faculty member who they can go up to and say, hey, I want to get better at this. Hey, I want to get better at that. I tried for the first couple of years to try to create a leadership curriculum for our residents, where I was so excited about the things I was learning that I wanted to teach it to the residents. But again, I missed the mark, because I was saying, okay, let's meet Mondays at 5:30. I'll get a couple of bottles of wine and some chips and we'll talk. Not really being sensitive to the fact that for a resident, Mondays at 5:30 are a really tough time. Even if they're done in the OR, which is not always the case, they've got all the days worth of cleanup left to do before they can go home. So yes, 5:30 to 6:30, they may be free, but that means they're not starting their work on the floor until 6:30, 6:45, 7. So, you know, it's a good intention, but I missed the mark with that. But I think making it, for, if there's any residents that are listening, making it obvious to someone that you admire and think you want to be like, hey, I want to work on this concretely. Can you help me? And I think in general, for all of us, if any of us, if I say to Phil, hey, Phil, you know what? I want to be more understanding in meetings. You know, I've noticed that I tend to get annoyed, or maybe someone else told, people have told me I get really annoyed in meetings. Can you help me get better at that? Can you keep me honest? Because I think we're all so afraid to tell each other the ways that we are falling short, and not from a bad place. It's awkward to tell someone they're not good. We don't know how to give feedback well. We don't know how to receive feedback well. So if we can create that environment around us so that we can keep getting better at those things, I think that's a small start. Ideally, at some point, you have the opportunity to enroll in one of these leadership courses, maybe as junior faculty or a little bit later on. And most academic centers, I think, have decent leadership programs now.
And there's certainly leadership opportunities for people in practice too. I mean, we see this now in the large private practice groups. I have colleagues I train with who are running large practice groups as either CEOs or practice managers, and it's really impressive to see the stuff that they're doing as well too. And they have similar pathways to success and to leadership. It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think you bring up a really good point too about accountability and mentorship there. And, we can all write down our mission statements and our objectives and what we want to get done in a year or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. But it's the really special person who can be introspective and honest with themselves and see if they're actually achieving those goals. And that's why it's so important to get good mentors and good colleagues. They don't even necessarily need to be mentors. This could be a peer who's brutally honest with you. And can tell you, you're not living up to what you said you want to do. You need to do this, this, and this better. And that's true, I think, outside of medicine too, right? Whether it's with your significant other or with your family or with your friends, true, strong relationships are built on people being brutally honest with each other sometimes, and not in a mean way, but being honest and being accountable. So seek out people you can be accountable to is my long-winded point I was trying to get to there.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. I agree with that.
Yeah, so we're getting close to an hour here, Jay. I'm going to kind of summarize some of the really important and really interesting points we've gone over, and then I'll ask if there's anything else you want to summarize or get to before we sign off for this time. But excuse me. So I think early on we talked about kind of evolution from being a active physician, clinician, and developing into leadership. And you said some of the best leaders are good listeners. And leadership is giving, it is service, and it has to be part of your identity. You have to live that leadership. Every moment of every day, it's who you are. And as you make decisions, as you behave, you're emulating a leader's quality to those around you, and that will generate leadership qualities in them, and a culture of well-being and a culture of wellness. You said it another way. You said walk the walk. You got to walk the walk every day. And I thought one of the really other interesting points we talked about was kind of the evolution of a mission. And you and I both, our mission, if you put it on paper when we started, hasn't changed that much, but the way we're enacting that mission really has changed. And it's about building team culture, and leadership has kind of grown from really enjoying being in team environments, working well with others, seeing other people succeed and taking enjoyment in their successes. So at that, I ask you if you have anything else you want to summarize, anything else you want to talk about, on this episode before we sign off.
Yeah, Phil, I would just turn the microphone back to you a little bit, or turn the spotlight back to you, I guess I should say, and just say thank you for having this space where we can talk about this, because I think lots of people think this is important, but we don't really have avenues for people to come out and say that. So I think you starting this podcast, I think you creating the space for people to have these kinds of discussions, because as far as I know, this is not on any in-service exam. This is not something that people say, hey, make sure you have this, that locked in your brain before you graduate residency or before you ascend to a certain part of your career. So largely, it's just been left to who naturally happens to be better at it, who's not good at it. And there's not been any focus on how can we all get better. I realize that not everyone is going to be the world's greatest leader, just like not everyone's going to be the world's greatest basketball player, but we all have a range that we can operate within. And I think it's only when we focus on these things that we can individually make progress on our own range. And for me, the best leaders are the ones who stop comparing themselves to others and just think, what are the things I have to do to get to the top of my own range? Not from a place of selfishness, but from a place of distancing yourself from the competition and from not wanting to do it for glory, but wanting to do it because you want to give of yourself in the most effective way possible.
I think that's great. It's a really strong sense of self. It's really identifying and being comfortable with who you are. And I appreciate you saying the kind words. And I've kind of said it from the beginning. And when I have conversations with people about this podcast and some of the lectures we've been giving and the talks, is that if you learn nothing specific from this podcast today, I'm sure there are lots of specifics that people will learn. It's that it's okay to talk about these things, and we should be talking about these things. This is who we are. This is how we develop. This is how we get better as an individual, as a community of surgeons, as a community of physicians, as a community of people who care about others. That's how we're going to get better, is talking through these things and working with each other. And we've got to get past the dogma that surgeons are just surgeons and they just deal with what they have to deal with and they move on with the rest of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, Jay, it's always a pleasure talking with you. I'm sure you'll be back to talk about more things. And we're really excited to see all the exciting things you're doing at Stanford and beyond. And I look forward to catching you in the gym at one of these meetings in the near future.
Yeah, I've been to 0 conferences in 2021. I miss you, man. I miss all my urology people, especially with Chris's passing, and especially with all the COVID isolation and all the personal struggles I've been going through. I look forward to catching back up with you and everybody else, hopefully very soon.
Yeah, we miss you too, buddy. We'll see you soon.
All right, man.
All right, take care, Jay.